I read every Stranger Things comic from 2018 to 2025, so you don't have to. But maybe you just can't get enough Stranger Things, like a little girl with telekinetic powers that can't get enough Eggos, and want to take a deep dive into all this extra material. And I'm here to tell you what's good. In this video, I'll be giving a brief story recap of each comic, mostly the highlights and important stuff. This will contain spoilers for these comics and seasons 1 through 4 of the show. If you have yet to see season 5 or haven't finished it, you are safe from season 5 spoilers here. I'm going to be giving my own personal thoughts on the comic, thoughts about the writing, art, direction, all that. And I'll tell you whether or not it's worth a read, using my coveted review system of either yes or no. So let's reactivate our Netflix subscriptions and get binging. Just before we start, I do want to line everything up in a little handy dandy timeline. That way we know when and where everything is taking place, and we'll add to it as we go. Yep, looks good to me. Let's get Stranger Things. Yeah. All right, so the first comic we're talking about is Stranger Things: The Other Side. This is from 2018. It is set in 1983, concurrently with the first season of the show. This is from Eisner Award-winning writer Jody Houser. She's known for her work in Star Wars comics, Doctor Who, and her award-winning book Faith from Valiant Comics. The comic follows Will Byers during his time in the Upside Down and fills a lot of contextual information. Pretty much picks up directly after Will enters the shed, grabs his gun, and enters the Upside Down. We see Will's first encounter with the Demogorgon and how that plays out. A lot of running, hiding, and crying in this comic, which, you know what, totally acceptable. We get a small moment where Eleven, appearing as an apparition, fades out of the Upside Down. I think this explains how Eleven knows Will is alive in the show. Several scenes of Will communicating with his mother. In the show, we see these moments from the perspective of Joyce Byers, but here we get Will's side of the story. Also, Will's perspective from all the various moments in the show where Will communicates from the Upside Down through supercoms and radios and whatnot. There's also a moment that isn't seen or explained in the show. Will comes across a dying man in the forest, and he's bleeding out from injuries that we don't know how he got or where he came from. But this will come back up again later. So just put a little pin in that. One thing this comic does in a really interesting way is show the world through Will's eyes. He imagines a bright and colorful world with himself as Will the Wise, his D&D character. It's hard to tell if this is like a fun comic book thing or if this is Will having a psychosomatic hallucination in an attempt to cope with his current situation. It's probably both. Like in the show, we get a scene where Joyce and Hopper rescue Will, but afterwards, when Will wakes up in the hospital, we see his worldview has been disastrously altered by his time in the Upside Down. It's some really messed up imagery. Although by season 2, it seems Will has this kind of minimized to just brief flashes. Art for this was fine. According to Jody Houser, her intention was to style this like a comic from the 80s, but I didn't really care for it personally. I did like the interpretation of all the little fantasy moments, though. Thought that played nicely. I feel like seeing the story of season 1 play out from Will's perspective is an interesting premise, but I didn't think it was enough to warrant a read. This is a no from me. Moving on, we're looking at The Game Master. This was released as a part of Free Comic Book Day in 2019. It's a short comic, another Jody Houser written comic, set in 1983, shortly after the events of season 1, but before the epilogue at the end of season 1. Basically, it's Nancy and Steve hanging out, and Nancy mentions that Mike is really broken up about Eleven's disappearance. Nancy, unsure of how to talk to Mike, has been avoiding it, but Steve convinces her that she should just ask him about Will as like her way in. So they confront Mike and ask him how Will's doing. By this point, he's just been let out of the hospital, and him and the boys haven't hung out properly since Will's disappearance. Nancy encourages Mike to come up with another D&D campaign for the boys, and Mike rambles on and on about D&D and his love for it, getting all excited and decides to write a new campaign. Some very detailed pencil work in here captures the emotion on the characters' faces really well, although the likenesses aren't perfect. This was cute and short, but totally skippable. No. Next, we're looking at Stranger Things 6. This is from 2019, another outing by Jody Houser. This is a prequel to the show, set in 1978, with flashbacks throughout the early 70s. This comic follows Francine, who is Subject 6, a part of the MK Ultra program at the Hawkins lab that is run by Dr. Brenner. It essentially tells the story of how 6 ended up at the lab and provides some depth into some of the other kids, including 11. 6 has the ability to see into the future somewhat. She basically gets hoodwinked into the program. In the early 1970s, she predicted lottery numbers and her parents won. They were able to move into a new house where, coincidentally, Agent Connie Frazier, you know, that crazy blonde lady from the first season, and a boy named Richard, aka Subject 3, live across the street. 3 has the ability to manipulate people by talking to them, the ultimate Riz power, very similar to Gambit, but without the charged up playing cards. 6's parents are abusive towards her, and 3 persuades her to meet Dr. Brenner, where she then voluntarily agrees to joining the MK Ultra program. During her stay, she meets Jamie and Marcy, aka Subjects 9 and 9.5, twin sisters. 9.5 seemingly has no abilities, while 9 has developed a type of pyrokinetic abilities. She also has a brief encounter with 11 pre-head shaving, but it's just a moment of witnessing her using her telekinetic abilities. All the backstory here is really dedicated to 6 though, and we don't really get much more than a surface level look at these other subjects. One day, Dr. Brenner is showing the other kids a demonstration of 9 using her abilities, but it goes terribly wrong, and she ends up comatose. Later, 6 manages to convince 3 to break out of the lab, and they bring along 9.5 with them. While escaping, they pass by a woman storming into the lab with a gun on the hunt for 11. It's never directly said, but it is assumed that this is Terry Ives, 11's biological mother. This breakout attempt fails, and she ends up in a vegetative state as a result of this. We see her like that in the show. Before the kids are home free, they are confronted by the lab security outside. In an attempt to prevent a worst possible future, 6 sacrifices herself for 3 and is gunned down, allowing 3 and 9.5 to successfully make it out. Now, there are a ton of canonical errors in here and wildly inconsistent characters, which we'll get into here in a second, but overall, this was okay. I like that it shows some interesting stuff with 6's future powers. She has some pretty wild visions of the future, seeing waffles and demogorgons and whatnot. Turns out they installed their sensory deprivation chamber specifically for 6 to aid her abilities, but the contextual information it provides is lacking and also wrong. As of 2022, Season 4 retcons these characters and corrects the timeline of these events. 3, 6, and 9 are all completely different kids in the show. It seems like they have different powers as well, and 11's mother actually broke into the lab in 1974, not 1978. With huge retcons like these, it's safe to assume this is a non-canon story, although it wasn't intended to be at time of release. Art is solid, but nothing special. Thought it captured the TV character's likeness as well. This story does have a follow-up, which is also non-canon, and we'll come back to that here in a minute. Because of the weak story, lack of contextual information, and the non-canon nature of this story, it's a no from me. All right, next we're looking at Zombie Boys. This is from 2020, set in 1984, shortly before the events of Season 2. Will is still dealing with his PTSD after the events of Season 1, and the kids at school have taken to calling him Zombie Boy. We see this carried over into Season 2. While doing an extra credit assignment, the boys are introduced to Joey Kim, a transfer student from San Francisco who has a passion for movies. Joey and the boys manage to convince the principal to allow them to make a movie for their extra credit assignment, and the principal reluctantly agrees. The boys want to make a zombie movie based off Will's Zombie Boy drawings, but Will is a little apprehensive about the whole thing. While filming, Will actually slips into an upside down episode and begins freaking out. The boys share a nice little tender moment and make Will feel safe. They film their zombie movie and debut it to the class, and everyone loves it. It just ends up bringing the boys closer together, except for Joey Kim, because this is his first and only appearance. This was a cute, low-stakes adventure. Does a good job of setting up the characters and what they're going through heading into Season 2. I like the art here. It's done by Valeria Favoccia. It manages to have a cute, cartoony aesthetic while simultaneously capturing these characters well. This is a fun, quirky premise, but not worth a read in my opinion. Kind of felt like it was intended for a younger demographic, so no from me. All right, next up is Into the Fire from 2020. This is a sequel to 6, also penned by Jody Houser. It's set 7 years after and just a few months before Season 3 in 1985. It picks up the the story of Subjects 3 and 9.5, who have been on the run for the last 7 years, looking for other kids who escaped the Hawkins lab. Lately, they've been specifically tracking down Kali, aka Subject 8, who had a minor role in Season 2. They eventually find her and her band of hoodlums, and Kali is immediately shocked to see who she thinks is 9, but it's really just her twin sister. Kali tells them that after they escaped the lab, she was forced to create fantasy illusions to keep 9 from going completely psychotic. That wasn't until Kali was powerful enough to escape. You learn that 9 has become harder to control, and as 11 grew more powerful, Dr. Brenner actually ordered all of the other test subjects to be terminated, including 9. But 9 was smuggled out by her doctor and put into another facility without Dr. Brenner's knowledge. After learning that, 3 and 9.5 head off to rescue her. While all that's happening, throughout the comic we get these glimpses into 9's fantasy world, where she imagines herself as a masked princess. Some Stranger Things happening for sure, and I love the aesthetic of these moments. There's some weird stuff in here that I appreciated. By the time 3 and 9.5 catch up with her, she's already broken out of the hospital and burned the place completely to the ground. They still manage to find her though, and upon confronting her, 9 manifests a fire sword and threatens to kill her sister. She's upset because Dr. Brenner made her think that her twin sister abandoned her, and now 9 resents her for that, but they have a cute little moment where they make up and everything's fine. It does have a pretty dark ending. At the end, 3 returns to the home of the doctor that smuggled 9 out of the Hawkins lab and literally rizzes him into killing himself. And that's it. Brutal. I found this more interesting and engaging than its predecessor, but it's not amazing. The art was good. I especially liked the design choices of the fantasy moments. There were some moments where the characters looked a little goofy though. Like the previous comic, the show definitely retcons these characters, so it's likely these events didn't happen. Also, we know what happens to all of these subjects already, so definitely not. No. And next up is Erica's Quest. This is from Free Comic Book Day in 2020. It's set in 1985, shortly after the events of Season 3. This comic is about Erica, Lucas's younger sister, who got a bigger role in Season 3. It's a quirky little comic about Erica attempting to sell some deadly chemicals she stole from the underground Russian secret base at the end of Season 3, and Dustin, Steve, and Robin attempt to stop her. Turns out, Erica's mom took her D&D books, and now she needs money to buy new ones, but luckily, she knows at least 5 people who are huge D&D nerds, and it ends with Erica getting to play some D&D. This is also the first and only time we see Steve and Robin playing D&D. It's short, it's cute, the art is fine, but no. Alright, and next up is The Bully. This is from 2020. This is set concurrently with Season 2 in 1984. The comic follows Troy and his friend James. You know, Troy, he's the bully that had his arm broken by 11, and also she made him pee himself. Yeah, that Troy. Troy's been having nightmares about 11 killing him, and his aggressive father demands that he man up and not take any shit from anyone. His father is a huge dickhead, which gives insight into why Troy is the way that he is. The comic follows Troy and James throughout the events of Season 2 and presents it from their perspective. The entire time, Troy is just trying to get back at the boys any way he can, and he's also a huge jerk to James. They end up encountering some demo dogs right before Steve's fight with them in Season 2, and pop up in a few other insignificant moments from the season. In the end, Troy realizes what a big asshole he's been and decides to apologize to James, so it seems like this whole experience changed him for the better. Isn't that nice? Valeria Favoccia back on the art here, also did the art for Zombie Boy, continues to be good. Even got a chance to draw some real Stranger Things type shit, which I loved. Besides the art, this was nothing. It's a decent coming-of-age story for a bully interwoven into Season 2 of the show, but he's a character that no one cares about, okay? And don't be down in the comments being like, we love P-Boy, because I ain't buying that shit. This is a no. All right, and next up is Science Camp, also from 2020, set in 1985 before Season 3. We hear a lot about Dustin's time at Science Camp in Season 3. He even wears the Science Camp hat the whole season, and this comic basically sees all that play out. It's a Dustin solo adventure. It follows Dustin as he spends a few weeks at Science Camp away from his friends. Dustin, having lived through the first 2 seasons of the show, has seen a lot by this point, and he carries himself with a lot of confidence. Enough confidence to ward off some bullies and become the most popular kid at Science Camp, like right away. We also get the backstory behind Dustin's girlfriend Susie here as well. She is crushing on him big time and doesn't know how to talk to him, and it turns out Dustin doesn't know how to talk to her either. Dustin also spends a lot of his time in this organizing a D&D game for his fellow campers. While all that's happening, the camp counselors, which are just a bunch of high school kids, are being picked off one by one by a mysterious man in an Albert Einstein mask wielding a screwdriver, which I thought was an interesting design and worked perfectly as like a science camp killer from the 80s. It was a good choice. Dustin takes note of the various counselors disappearing and decides to find out what's happening. Him and his crew Scooby-Doo around for a bit until they run into some counselors who are also investigating the Albert Einstein killer. At that moment, the killer appears and just stabs another counselor in broad daylight with everyone watching. The kids rush in and tackle the killer to the ground. Turns out it was just another one of the camp counselors pretending to kill people so that the camp would have to shut down and they could quit their jobs and enjoy their summer. It's very Scooby-Doo. This was like low stakes Friday the 13th. Cute and simple, no supernatural elements or stakes really, but that's okay. It was still a fun little mystery, and it shows Dustin really coming into his own and functioning without his best friends. Art was fine. I kind of thought they did Gaten Matarazzo a little dirty in the interpretation here, but it works. I thought this was fun. Overall inconsequential, but I liked seeing the backstory behind Dustin's girlfriend and the campy nature of everything. See what I did there? I liked the feeling of the contextual information here. This is a yes from me. All right, next up is Halloween in Hawkins. This is a 2020 Halloween special one-shot comic set right before the events of Season 1. A short story of the boys telling scary stories one Halloween night at Castle Byers, and Will decides to tell the story of the Hawkins Child Eater. The comic actually has a stylistic shift during Will's story. Makes it look pulpy and 1950s-y, which I appreciated. Will's story is a parody of Stephen King's It, and basically the Child Eater appears every few years and eats exactly 8 kids and then goes away again and comes back. And there's 4 kids hanging out at the library at night talking about the Child Eater when they have a very Scooby-Doo moment and realize they're the Child Eater's next victims. And the police were in on it the whole time, and there was a big cover-up, blah, blah, blah. Back in the real world, the boys are like, yeah, that'll never happen. And then the Child Eater turns up. Turns out it's just Will's brother Jonathan dressed up. The boys realize they've been had, and everyone's all cheeky in the end. This was fun. I appreciated the aesthetic choices made by the writer and artist here, and there were some decently fucked Stranger Things in here. The only reason I'm not recommending it is because there isn't a lot of substance here, and I feel like you get everything you need to see right here in this video, so no. All right, next we're looking at Stranger Things, Dungeons and Dragons. This is from 2020. This jumps around between different points in between seasons. The first issue is set before season 1 and shows the origin of how the boys got into D&D and how they met Dustin and formed their party. The second issue picks up where the comic The Game Master left off right after season 1 and sees the boys playing Mike's newest D&D campaign, the first time since Will's disappearance. The third issue is set right before season 3 and shows 11 and Max playing D&D for the first time. We get some cute moments in here. And the fourth issue is set at the end of season 3, and it shows Will's last game with the party before the Byers moved to California. There's some pretty sweet art in here. We see depictions of the kids' characters within the game, battling different lore-accurate monsters from D&D, like the Beholder, large-scale battles with a bit of fantasy action. It's fun to see. I liked the feeling of all this contextual information. Obviously, D&D is a big part of the show and the boys' lives, and I appreciated that the comic showed these small little moments of the kids bonding over the game. Moments that would work perfectly within the show, but just cut for time, I think, which is fine. The comic book format works great for this anyways, so that's why this is a yes. All right, next we're taking a look at Tomb of Ybwen. This is from 2021, takes place in early 1985 before the events of Season 3, and only a couple of months after the death of Bob Newby. This is a story about Will recovering an old treasure map Bob left within the founding documents of the Hawkins AV Club. Will and the rest of the party set out to find Bob's hidden treasure during one of the worst blizzards in Hawkins history. The characters here are spot on. There's a lot of tension between the boys and Will. We see this carried over into season 3 of the show, and the comic does a good job of capturing that. The boys give Will a lot of shit for wanting to find this treasure, and I know they're children, but damn, dude, this kid's been through a lot. Can we not just cut him a break? They do eventually end up tracking down the X on the map, which presents them with another treasure map, which they lose. By this point, the blizzard is getting worse, and the boys contact their science teacher, Mr. Clark, for help. Mr. Clark bundles up and heads out after him. What a guy. The boys continue on their treasure hunt and finally stumble upon the tomb of Yabuin, where Mr. Clark catches up with them. They're saved! Hooray! But then he twists his ankle. Wanting to help Will find his treasure, Mr. Clark encourages the boys to keep going, and eventually they do turn up some treasure. Turns out the treasure is just a note left by Bob when he was 15 that basically says that whoever finds this letter is a true adventurer and puzzle solver, and that they're cool or whatever, and that they should be friends in real life. Very cute. The blizzard persists and Mr. Clark's condition worsens. The boys decide they have to get him medical attention and band together to carry him through the blizzard. Luckily, Mr. Clark's girlfriend turns up and rescues all of them because they definitely would have died. Through their adventure, the boys manage to stabilize their relationship, and Will learns that he's not as alone as he thinks. Oh, and Mr. Clark, he's fine. The art for this was great. Probably the best these books have had to offer by this point. It's not too comic booky, very true to life. Only wish the artist had more of an opportunity to pencil some real Stranger Things type shit, you know? This was basically like the Goonies with lower stakes. I like the premise, and there are some cathartic emotional moments for these characters, but it doesn't warrant a read, so no. All right, next we're looking at the Stranger Things Winter Special. This is from 2021. This is set in 1984 and takes place a couple of months after season 2. Tells the story of Eleven's first Christmas and shows the origin of how she got her very own supercom. Most of the main characters meet up at the Byers' house and have Christmas. They want to watch a holiday special together that they taped off the TV and ask Eleven to pick one out, but she doesn't know what they are. The boys take turns describing different Christmas specials. They do Santa Claus is Coming to Town, The Grinch, Christmas Carol, and Dustin tells a story where it's about a guy dancing with a dog. I didn't know that one. All of these stories are retold, but in a Stranger Things style, featuring characters and creatures from the show. There's some fun imagery here. The entire time, Dustin thinks he's seen a creature in the woods and convinces everyone to investigate. Turns out it's just an injured rabbit, and they bring it inside and patch it up. It ends with everyone all cheery and whatnot, and Eleven wants to watch all of the Christmas specials. She just couldn't decide. This was real cutesy. I think I liked the Halloween special more in comparison, but really, this just had a different vibe, and it's fine. Art's fine, nothing special, but this is a no from me. Okay, next we're looking at Erica the Great. This is from 2022 and takes place after season 3. Follows Lucas's sister Erica, who is now obsessed with D&D. Throughout the comic, she's trying to convince her friends that D&D is fun and cool, and she tries to get them into it, but they aren't really having it. A bunch of hijinks ensues, and the girls have to go on a real-life quest to recapture a lost parakeet. Like a couple of the comics before this features a lot of moments depicting the real-life events in the D&D world, and there are a lot of really fun and quirky sequences in here. More great stylized art provided by Valeria Favoccia. I think she captures these characters in this whole world perfectly in her own way, and I'm a big fan of the aesthetic. Now, Zombie Boys, The Bully, and this are all original graphic novels, and they've been compounded into the Stranger Things After School Omnibus. These stories are cute and with no real consequences. Personally, I feel I don't fit the target demographic for these. These are definitely more for your kids, ranging between like 8 to 12, and would be a fun read for them, but if you don't fit that demo, then this is a no. All right, next we're looking at Stranger Things Kamchatka. This is from 2022. It's set in 1985, around and after season 3. This comic fills in some backstory behind the Demogorgon being held at the Kamchatka Russian prison. Basically, after the Russians' big energy gun blew, Russian scientist Dr. Karine survived that event and managed to recover a little Demogorgon slug. While raising it at the Kamchatka prison, she comes to realize that the Demogorgon is dying due to its lack of connection with the Upside Down. So they force a theoretical scientist to provide the means for it to increase its telepathic abilities and strengthen its connection. He basically makes this weird mind device. The scientist's kids are then picked up by an ex-Soviet spy named Frost, who assists them in finding their father. He's a total badass, by the way. He has a lot of really cool moments in this comic. There's also this Ivan Drago looking ass guy who's hunting them down the whole time. Him and Frost have a lot of history together and an antagonistic relationship now. They end up making it to Kamchatka prison, and Frost and Ivan have a big showdown. The kids manage to save their father, and in the end, Frost sacrifices himself by pulling a grenade and blowing a hole in the prison. This was definitely the goriest of these books so far, which I appreciated, and I feel like a lot of these comics are lacking that element. The style and the aesthetic choices were on point for a Stranger Things type 80s gritty espionage adventure, and I liked it. This doesn't explore any of the backstory behind the Demogorgon cloning program, though, which I would have have liked to have seen, but oh well. This worked for me. It fit the tone of this universe and managed to be interesting despite featuring no characters from the show. There's a lot of nuance here that I'm leaving out only because I do think this is worth a look. Yes. All right, and next is Creature Feature. This is from Free Comic Book Day in 2022. It is set in 1985 after the events of season 3 while the Byers family is traveling to California. The Byers boys and Eleven stop at a drive-in movie theater where they're playing a double feature of monster movies. While there, Eleven sees some dudes in monster costumes and starts having a panic attack with vivid hallucinations of real-life monsters from her past. Nothing super intense, but subtly freaky. Eleven worries about her friends and not being able to protect them since her powers are gone, and the Byers are like, yep, well, what are you gonna do? And they all proceed to watch the movies. Riveting stuff. The art was solid for an 8-page story, no complaints there. This was just an unnecessary little addition to the universe, and it's not very engaging, so no. All right, and next is the Stranger Things Summer Special from 2022. This takes place in 1985 during the events of Season 3. It's basically the misadventures of Hawkins police officers Powell and Callahan and what they get up to during the season. A familiar format for these comics. They have an encounter with Mrs. Driscoll, a couple of encounters with Billy, and they spend a lot of time turning up to events right after the main characters leave. The entire time, they're just missing all of the Stranger Things type stuff, and at the end, there's a joke where they're like, well, haven't we seen it all? Art is fine. I liked these characters in the show, but this was pointless in my opinion. It's played for laughs. At least some of these stories, like The Bully and The Other Side, presented some interesting contextual information, but this provides nothing but a cheap laugh, so no. And next up is Tales from Hawkins. This is from 2023. This is 4 anthology stories focusing on different characters at different points during the show. Jody Hauser back on writing duties. The first issue takes place during the first season and shows a duo of hunters running into some of the strangest of things. This issue actually explains the backstory behind the dying man Will met in the Other Side comic, so that was a nice callback. The second issue focuses on Murray right after the events of season 1. It shows him getting familiar with Hawkins and its people as he tries to uncover the truth behind the events of the first season and Barb's death. It was interesting to see what Murray was up to during this time because I really enjoy his character in the show, but this didn't capture him very well, I thought. He looks fine, but the character is lacking here, partially because Brett Gelman isn't here to embody the character. The third issue is about Robin, set before the events of season 3. The story is about Robin directing a student film starring her crush, Tammy, who sings like a Muppet, trying to get her to notice her and whatnot. We see some interactions with Steve when they were in high school together and she sat behind him in class. The characters here are spot on, and I liked the fleshing out of Robin's character with this story. The fourth issue takes place at the beginning of season 2. It's about these two rival pumpkin farmers in Hawkins. The farmers end up both getting a little too close to Stranger Things and have to set aside their differences and work together. Everything works out in the end and everybody's great. Unnecessary. 4 different artists, 1 for each issue, no complaints there. I thought every character's POV was accurately styled. Some of these stories I liked, some I didn't care for. I feel like it's common for anthology comics to be a bit of a mixed bag, and this is no exception. If you were to read anything, I'd say go for issues 2 and 3, but other than that, no. Okay, and next up is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles X Stranger Things. This is a TMNT Stranger Things crossover from 2023. Takes place in 1985 before the events of season 3. This is also a non-canon story for very obvious reasons. The Stranger Things kids take a field trip up to New York City, baby, and of course, if there's an upside down in Hawkins, then there's definitely an upside down in the Big Apple. The kids run into these Demogorgon Mauser hybrids, but are saved by our heroes on the half shell. And these ain't your grandpappies, Ninja Turtles. They're yes, they are. These are the classic 1980s Turtles from their original debut in 1984, where they all wore red masks. This was a clever callback, and I appreciated it. Basically, what's happening here is a couple of Utroms, the, people that Krang is from, were messing around with some extra dimensional technology and accidentally opened a gate into the upside down. Baxter Stockman, being the mad scientist that he is, starts experimenting with Demogorgons and decides to trap Eleven and use her powers to exploit the upside down, but little does he know that he is actually the one being exploited. The Mind Flayer turns up and we get some great imagery here of it climbing the Empire State Building. There's a lot of solid action here and some clever panel work, I thought, as well. At one point, point, some of the boys end up with the turtles' weapons, which I thought was a bit silly and also dangerous. Where are the adults? Art in this was all right. Like I said, I liked a lot of the imagery here and the action sequences. And now, there are a ton of TMNT crossovers, like a ridiculous amount. And I've read a handful, and they're always fun to me, but this one was pretty average and took itself too seriously, I thought. If you're a fan of TMNT and Stranger Things, this is worth a look, sure, but if you aren't big on TMNT, this definitely shouldn't be your introduction to them. There's some way better crossover choices out there, so no. All right, next we're looking at The Voyage from 2023. This is somewhere between Season 3 and Season 4. It's a loose sequel to Kamchatka with the same creative team. Features Dr. Kareen from Kamchatka and a group of Russian agents as they attempt to move a Demogorgon aboard the U.S. ship Persephone back to the motherland. The captain of the ship, Captain Jacoby, he is the complete opposite of a Curious George and doesn't ask too many questions about these Russians despite it being peak Cold War times. But once members of his crew start disappearing one by one, he decides to get to the bottom of it. He keeps losing people and everyone is super paranoid about the Russians, and he ends up confronting and escaping the Demogorgon's clutches. The comic turns into a big Demogorgon hunt and massacre pretty quick. There's some pretty gnarly, intense panels in here. At one point, Dr. Kareen decides to use the telepathic device that we saw in Kamchatka to actually control the Demogorgon's actions. Never seen that before, thought it was pretty cool. But Captain Jacoby ends up blowing the ship sky high, leaving Dr. Kareen as the only survivor. This was genuinely great. It had very similar vibes to Kamchatka, partially because it's the same creative team, but they really upped the gore factor in this one, cut out any type of subplot involving children, and just told a tense Cold War story that also happens to involve a Demogorgon. This is the type of Stranger Things story I want to see in comic format. May not be for everybody, but I really enjoyed this. Yes. Okay, and next we're looking at Deliver Me from Evil. This is from Free Comic Book Day in 2024. Seemingly set in 1986 before the events of Season 4, the comic focuses on Argyle and Jonathan as they make a pizza delivery run. And while driving to their destination, Argyle recounts some scary stories from his past. He recalls having a run-in with a chupacabra, La Llorona, and other strange beings, but in reality, they were just normal encounters that he imagined. This was a short and silly little Argyle tale. I felt it captured his character very well, and this comic managed to get a genuine laugh out of me. I really liked the art here. It's unlike anything else in these comics that I've seen so far. This doesn't add or change anything for these characters or this world, but I just thought it was funny, and it's free, so yes. Alright, and next up, we're looking at Dungeons & Dragons, The Rise of Hellfire. This is from 2025. It's set in 1985 before the events of Season 4, with flashbacks to the late 70s and early 80s. The plot focuses on Eddie as he enters his last year of high school, wanting to run his best D&D campaign yet, but is struggling for ideas, so he recalls the story of how he first got into D&D, how the experience changed him, and how his first dungeon master inspired him to be a storyteller. This comic gives a lot of backstory for Eddie Munson and presents the origin of how the Stranger Things boys joined the Hellfire Club. We learn that when Eddie was a freshman in 1979, he was dragged into playing D&D, initially reluctant to play at first, but ended up falling in love with it, obviously. We get a lot of depth into Eddie's character here. It kind of explores Eddie's relationship with his father a bit and shows how dedicated he is to the storytelling aspect of D&D, which makes him an excellent choice to run Hellfire in the future. Lots of moments like in previous comics where the style shifts and we enter the world of Dungeons and Dragons, where we see some decent fantasy action. In the 1985 storyline, we see Eddie's first encounter with the boys, asking them to join Hellfire. This moment is only talked about in the show, but we see it fully play out here. Turns out the boys were initially against playing without Will and were content on never playing again, but Eddie manages to turn them around. In the end, Eddie figures out his grand finale to his campaign and begins to flesh it out, and we all know where that ends up. This was good. Like everyone, I really enjoyed Eddie's character in Season 4, and this comic fills a lot of contextual information that I feel is essential for a Stranger Things fan. Art was solid, captured characters' likeness as well, and the stylistic shifts to the D&D world were fun. If you feel like you didn't get enough Eddie out of Season 4, then this is definitely worth a read. Yes. Okay, in our last Stranger Things comic, we're looking at Tales from Hawkins 2. This is from 2025, another 4 anthology stories just like the first Tales from Hawkins series. The first issue being a Mr. Clark story set during season 2 where he has a run-in with a demo dog at a drive-in movie. The comic also does show Dart, Dustin's demo dog, eating Dustin's cat Muse, which we don't see in the show. The second issue is focused on Will Byers and him dealing with his PTSD and his upside-down hallucinations after the events of season 1. The boys try to cheer him up by taking him to a comic book shop, but it doesn't work. Mr. Clark ends up giving Will a pep talk and convinces him to channel his negativity into creativity, and Will ends up making a comic strip for the school newspaper. It's a nice moment of levity for Will. The third issue focuses on that Russian Terminator-looking guy from season 3 and provides a bit of backstory for him, and also it shows him arriving in Hawkins to oversee the construction of the Starcourt Mall. There are several Terminator references in here. There's a moment where someone forces some Terminator Type 1 glasses on him and he smashes them to bits, and another moment where he uses the iconic line of "I'll be back." It's a bit campy and unnecessary, but I thought it was a fun nod. The last issue focuses on the Demogorgon from season 1 and shows the beginning of season 1 from its perspective. I loved the stylized art in this issue, and it had a ton of gory, gruesome moments of the Demogorgon just tearing through people and wildlife. It's pretty sick. It all leads up to the creature finding Will and the plot of season 1 officially starting. Overall, I think I liked this more than the first series. These stories were just more consistent across the board, but I don't think any of them were necessary. It's all mostly useless contextual information. I would say the last issue is worth a skim, but other than that, this is a no. And that's it. That's every Stranger Things comic available right now. And I just want to start off my final thoughts by saying I really enjoy the show. It's a bit derivative, but I think the characters, performances, music, and vibes, they're all there. Something these comics failed to capture for me. After reading all of these, I've come to the conclusion that I don't think I'm the target demographic for most of these comics. And that makes me wonder, who are these for? And why so many little throwaway stories? I don't know, maybe focus on more important side characters instead of pumpkin farmers? Or why not team up some characters that we don't normally see team up in the show? Or why not tell more gritty stories like Kamchatka or The Voyage? I just feel like there's a lot of room to play in this universe and a lot of fun to be had doing it through the medium of a comic book, but these comics just don't take many chances, which makes a lot of them feel unnecessary. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. Thanks for watching and being here. If you thought this was even a tad bit interesting, or you liked the fact that maybe I saved you a little bit of time, then go ahead, hit that like button for me. It helps us out a lot. We're coming back in a few weeks with a complete retrospective of every Alien comic ever. It's going to be very similar to this video, except way longer. So should be fun. So why don't you subscribe and come on back for that? And if you have a series you want to see covered in this format, please comment down below. Tell me what you want to see. That's it for this video. Goodbye.